Hi. Um, I'm doing another one of these because the last one I did was like strangely therapeutic in a way that I certainly did not expect it to be. I'm not sure if you could tell by that video or like literally anything about me, but I am not exactly like a person who's camera facing or who enjoys it. And I think just in general, being an introvert, I am very like keen on preserving like how I'm perceived by other people and wanting to maintain control of that as much as I possibly can. And so I think having these sort of video journals where I'm like stream of consciousness, just rambling and yapping about what I'm going through, what I'm learning and experiencing during this like really strange time in my life, hopefully can act as some sort of like exposure therapy for letting go of that feeling because I know at the end of the day I can't control how everyone looks at me and how everyone thinks about me, despite trying very hard to do so for most of my life. And I think even more so as just someone who wants to continue to be a writer and a creator in general of art. I think for me it requires that level of intentionality and sincerity. So hopefully this will help just by sharing these and posting them. And if they come across anyone's feeds, hopefully that can hopefully help them. At least that's the wishful thinking that I have regarding these things. But for now, it's kind of nice to talk to a camera, and I did not think that it would be that nice to do that, but here we are. I also hope you'll forgive. I have my window open because it's a really nice day out, and I know that comes at the cost of like background noise. So I will do my best to kind of hopefully mitigate that. But today, what I wanted to talk about was the thing that I've been learning about myself during this time of my breakup has been that I don't really like being alone, like at all. And it's similar to what I had written last week on my Substack, which I will link somewhere in the description. But I basically talked about how I do not like to feel like uncomfortable, And in that same vein, I've gone to great lengths to avoid feeling uncomfortable, and that's led me to do a lot of running away in life, from circumstances and from people whenever things got dicey or confrontational in a way that I just did not know how to handle or simply just didn't want to. And running felt like the best option to me. And coming out of that was when I met my ex-girlfriend, and that was the first time that I had really experienced a situation where I didn't want to run away when things got really difficult. I could still feel the drive to want to do that, but the way she was and everything about her, it just completely went against that in my nature. And ultimately, over the course of our, of 2 years that we were together, it changed a lot. And I was able to see just how damaging that had become in my life in a way that, I mean, you can run as much as you can, but, your problems and the sort of fallout that accompanies a lifestyle like that, catches up to you, it always does. And having to kind of reconcile those things with someone that I didn't want to keep doing that with, and I didn't want to repeat that pattern with, was eye-opening. And now being at the end of that and trying to move forward and understand myself is now requiring me to kind of look inward and see, why do I do that to begin with, right? And I think a lot of what it is that I just don't like being alone. So much in the sense of like, I think I do it to avoid, I run away to something else in order to avoid that loneliness that I know will almost certainly follow up, or at least that's what I anticipate is meant to follow up, like a conversation or a confrontation, things just getting heavy and having to communicate. I've always been someone who is like the worst case scenario person, where it's like, well, obviously if this happens, it's over, and then I'd rather just beat that person to the punch and leave, before it can get to that point, and never really trusting that maybe life won't always go that way, and it doesn't have to be that way, and even if it does, there, I'll just be honest, it's cowardly, and I've lived cowardly for a long time, longer than I'd ever really want to admit, but it's the truth, and being at a point now where it's like I want to be intentional, I want to be honest and live that sincere life. I know that comes at the cost of confronting that part of my life that I did spend being cowardly, because loneliness is difficult, you know what I mean? It's arguably maybe the most uncomfortable feeling that we can feel, especially as like social creatures, and I feel like coming out of this relationship, I'm feeling that a lot more, just in like the weight of time feeling so much longer now. The days just seem to like drag on, and as much as I try to fill up my time with different things, it's like when we were together, we were long distance, but we spent like virtually as much time as we possibly could with each other, whether that was being on a video call or just texting. There was seldom a time that we were not together, and I think that's very, I've been in other long distance relationships before, and this was certainly unique to us, and I really, really liked having that, I think looking back, it was definitely not the healthiest for either of us to be that ingrained in each other's lives, to like where we were kind of actively suffocating the other aspects of our life that we needed to, not necessarily address, but just like to grow in. We were just kind of filling up our time with, I'd rather not do this because I'd rather have that time spent with you. And that came at a cost of me not doing things that I had set out to do and wanted to do, and the same for her. And now that, it's over, and there's a lot more time in my days now, and I'm kind of fully realizing just how much time there is in a day, because it's always like that, right? Like I have a bit of a structure now where, I wake up, I will go on my run in the morning, come back, kind of decompress. I have like these like brain games that I'll do to kind of just like get myself just stuff that's like not brain rotty, and even stuff like Duolingo, to learn Spanish and get better at that. And I'll have like my reading time that I'll try to set aside and do for a few hours. And despite as much as I'm doing, there still comes a point in every day, lately, that it will just hit like a sinking feeling of dread and loneliness, that it's like I don't know what to do. I feel lost, and it's paralyzing sometimes. I will just sit in my phone, and I'm back on social media now, but I had taken a break from it once the breakup had happened, because I just kind of wanted to get away from everything and kind of unplug and kind of let myself reset before going back and having to kind of address all these things of we're no longer together, telling that to my friends and updating them and dealing with the absence of that person, especially on social media. But it was really hard, I think, again, as social creatures, that solitude rather, is really, it's jarring, I think, especially in a digital age right now where we are far more connected than any point in human history, you know what I mean? And that like threshold is only being like pushed further and further down, with the more technological advances that we have, you know what I mean? Um, and so it's like truly these are unprecedented times in like more than one way. And I think with the rise of social media and what social media has sort of like evolved into, um, it feels so, you feel like a fish out of water, you know? The month or so that I had spent off of it, I had tried to replace, you know, the apps that I use, which were really just like Instagram and TikTok, um, and, you know, sometimes Reddit, but I had gotten rid of the apps and tried downloading other apps that would kind of fill that time up, you know? I had found like Google's art and culture app, which shows like a bunch of different like museums that you can look through virtually and see artwork and stuff like that. Stuff like Wikipedia, just stuff that I could learn and feel like I was using my time on my phone more wisely. You know what I mean? But no matter what, anytime I would meet up with like friends or even with talking with my family and my coworkers, you would just feel that FOMO, but FOMO in such a way that like it's not even so much like trends. It just feels like it's a different world, you know? Because I had even downloaded a bunch of like news apps, like NPR, stuff like that, to feel like I was not entirely disconnected from what was happening, at least on a global sense. But it really is a different beast entirely, being online and being connected into social media, more so than the news, because it's like as informed as I was trying to be and keep up on, it just felt like it was just like we were speaking different languages, you know what I mean? And then even coming back to social media, that kind of lost its spark as well. I've only really re-downloaded Instagram and Reddit, but there's no desire there anymore, you know, and I recognize that a lot of that is because I'm still grieving this relationship, and sort of like realizing, like I said, the absence of that person. That, I mean, a lot of the time that I was on Instagram or TikTok was to find stuff to send to them, you know, and now that I don't have that, there's something lacking there, you know what I mean? There's no real desire. And also taking into account like the state of the world and where we're at right now, and it just, I don't know, it feels like even more difficult terrain to navigate, because I don't necessarily, I can hold all these things in my mind, right, to know that there are these different factors at play, but it still does not make the roadmap of it any easier. And then even like similarly, like with, I have a PlayStation. We would play games together all the time, and since the breakup I have not touched it like whatsoever. I have no desire to anymore. And like even apart from them, I'm sorry for the helicopter, but even apart from them, I would not, I would be playing games all the time, you know what I mean? I would spend hours doing it. It was like a nice little pastime, and now again that they're gone, the desire is gone. And that I think only like adds to the feeling of like there being so much time in a day where I'm like, I don't know what to do at a certain point, you know what I mean? I don't know how to keep busy, where I'm like, there's only so much of I can read of my book in a day, or so much brain games that I can play where I don't feel like I'm going crazy. And I think that, like I said, has been the biggest challenge, is simply being like comfortable in the discomfort of being alone, or, you know, loneliness in general, because I still go out, you know what I mean? I go to work, I hang out with my family, me going out in general, which usually just amounts to me going to the movies with, you know, friends or by myself. I'm still trying to go out into the world and experience things, and again, go on runs and things of that nature, but like I said, there is that underlying feeling of loneliness that I just do not like. And I think, you know, who can say that they like it, right? I think maybe some extreme introverts, but again, we're social creatures, and I think we have that innate desire for wanting that community, wanting to feel connected with others, and wanting to have some sort of relationship, you know what I mean, to like, I don't know if this is the right word, but maybe, but like just some form of stimulation to kind of keep us there. And it's through this struggle that I've kind of been able to reconcile that, because I had not addressed that for so long in my life, that was a pretty big factor in my relationship, where I think it all went kaput. I could not be comfortable in the loneliness of, they were in school at the time and still are, but when they would be gone, I wouldn't know what to do with that loneliness feeling, you know what I mean? When I was filling up my days with them constantly, having them there, and when they weren't there, I didn't know what to do. You know what I mean? I hadn't really made a discipline of that to focus on things creatively, or focus on pouring in that time and effort and energy into me, that I just kind of did nothing, and there's that quote, I think it's like a Bible verse maybe, but I can't quote it off the top of my head, like exactly if it's a verse or a quote, but I know it's in a song by the Smiths, but it's like, the devil will find work for idle hands to do, and I think that has always been the problem for me, is that I don't know how to be comfortable in that feeling, and so the idleness will set in, and that leads you to make bad decisions, and bad choices, and seek, again, some form of stimulation, some form of companionship that it's not necessarily a good thing, you know what I mean? I think despite us being social creatures, it is something to be said about wanting to just be alone and be okay with being alone, and that, to sit with your thoughts and not think of your head as a scary place, you know what I mean? But thinking of it as it's just a part of you, an extension of you. And now that I'm in a place where I'm kind of forced to do that, which not even, right? Because there is still very much a pull to go against this period in my life of sitting with the uncomfortable or the discomfort, and there's an underlying level, in the same way that I would want to run away, is kind of finding something to fill that loneliness void, and so I've really been trying to sit and stay lonely, I guess, is the only way to put it. Forgive me. Because I think it is something that it's required for us, and it's at least required for me, and I think everything in my life has been pointing to this is a very big issue that I need to address and kind of set myself straight in, because there are going to be periods when we are lonely and when we don't have anyone there, and it's sort of a way to learn how to self-soothe, and it's another thing to say, I guess, with like the sort of cultural world we live in here in like the western side of the world, but it's that you shouldn't or don't necessarily have to deal with anything that's like unpleasant or not easy, you know what I mean? I think we live in a very privileged country, and that often comes in the form of like, well, if it's uncomfortable and I don't want to deal with it, then why do I have to? It's like, but that's growth, you know what I mean? Like, growth isn't always easy, and growth is not also always something that is wanted, you know what I mean? Because it goes against what or where you're set currently, you know what I mean? Where your roots have grown into, and if your roots are growing somewhere that are not in a soil that is not healthy for you, that is not serving you to your fullest potential, then there is a period that you have to uproot yourself, and plant yourself in something more steady, something more reliable. And a lot of that comes at the cost of discomfort. And I think, in a place where we often avoid those things so easily because we have the privilege of doing that and the privilege of not having to experience those hardships all the time. And that's not to say that's for everyone, you know what I mean? This country is deeply flawed, and the gap between classes is only, growing more each day. But I think for a lot of this, or a lot of us, I should say, it's so much easier to avoid discomfort than to just like grapple with those feelings and getting like building those muscles up, emotionally, mentally, that life isn't always going to be easy. Life isn't always going to be on the up and up. And how do we learn to deal with those dips and when the tornado comes and crashes everything down is by dealing with those things, and sitting with them and really becoming introspective on those things, and learning where they come from, especially. And I'm still trying to learn for me where exactly that comes from, why I do and why I act in the way that I do and have. And even that in and of itself is uncomfortable, you know what I mean? Having to sit with yourself in the mirror and really think about what motivates you and what keeps you going in habits that you might not even know are habits, you know what I mean? The nature is so reflexive that you don't even think about why you do it. It just feels like it's ingrained in you. And certainly that is not to say that there aren't parts of us that aren't inherent, you know what I mean? Like our personality and stuff like that. But I think sometimes we really have to look inward to see what parts of us are me and what parts of us are things that we simply, or habits that we never broke, you know what I mean? Habits that just kept getting ingrained in our minds, that we no longer think twice about it, and we no longer think of it even as something that can be changed, something that for me, which is like a minor kind of version of it, but one of the New Year's resolutions I had came from CoStar, funnily enough, and it had said no more caffeine after 3 p.m. And that was crazy because and like anyone who knows me, I drink soda and sweet tea. Like, I'm from Texas, okay? Like, I drink caffeine, anything with caffeine in it, like, it's my job. So, I would be drinking, like, Cokes up until, like, 11 midnight, and my body was just running off of that elevated state, you know what I mean? Like, I had just always done that, and I never really even thought about, oh, well, if I drink sweet tea at like 10 p.m., like, that's caffeinated, that's going to keep me up at some level. And I would just kind of chalk it up and be like, oh, I'm just a night owl, you know what I mean? Like, I like staying up late and being up when everyone else is asleep. And it wasn't until the start of this year that I had gotten that New Year's resolution where I started cutting out caffeine at 3. And I experienced the craziest withdrawal, like, after like a week and a half, I was super irritable and just like on edge, and I was like just so jittery, and I felt so like just annoyed. I was like, I hate how I feel right now. I don't like this. Like, what is wrong with me? And it was because I had cut out caffeine, and I was having withdrawals from having caffeine throughout most of the day, every day, and my body was not a fan of the sudden change, and it felt so weird. And looking back on it now, it's kind of funny to think that I was ever really experiencing withdrawals with it, because now it's not so bad. And actually, I've just had the inverse of that, where there are some times where I'm not always sticking to it. The other day was my little brother's birthday, and we went out to a place that had sweet tea. And I was like, you know what? It's a celebration. Let me get a sweet tea. And they had free refills. And so it was probably like around 4 that I was like drinking these things. And I think I had maybe like 3 refills total of like a, standard 12-ounce glass maybe. I did not go to sleep at all last night. I, like, from midnight to like 5 in the morning, just straight awake. Could not fall asleep. I'd lay my head down on the pillow. My brain would like just feel so uncomfortable and would not shut off, and it could not shut off. I didn't sleep. I had to sleep most of this morning to kind of catch up on that. And it was because of the caffeine. My body had already gotten used to not having that caffeine, that stimulation after 3. So by the time I did get to like 10 p.m., 11 p.m. when I want to go to bed, my brain's like, we cannot do this. You know what I mean? Like, we're already up. We're wired. But even then, looking at that, it's like, well, change is possible. It's not easy, and it often comes with us kicking and screaming, our bodies being physically upset at us for having to adjust, but we're adaptable creatures, you know what I mean, first and foremost, and change won't kill us, despite what we might think and what our brains might tell us, and I have to keep that in mind when I'm sitting alone by myself and that dread starts to set in, where I just feel lonely and I'm like, I don't know what to do with this feeling. And I think it's simply withdrawal, you know what I mean, in another form. And I will overcome that too, and it's not going to be easy. I don't know how long it will take. But I know that in the same way that I was able to overcome that or this with caffeine, certainly I can do it with this, social aspect of my life. And it is hard, you know what I mean? I think our brains are hardwired for comfort more than anything, obviously. And we're often at ends with ourselves, you know what I mean? Like, there's a war taking on within where your body's like, no, you need to feel comfort, you need to feel something safe. And I think at some level, yes, that is true, we can experience that and have that comfort, but I do think that to experience true growth, you're going to have to constantly push yourself past those feelings and constantly push past what your mind might be telling you in order for that growth to happen. And it's got to come from you, you know what I mean? I know my sister, my family, and friends have been very vocal about these things and have noticed these patterns in my life before. And it's one thing to hear them from others, but it's another thing to accept it within yourself and realize that there is something that needs to be worked on, and being able to take those steps to achieve that, and then also just to give yourself some credit, you know what I mean? I think so often we are, and at least for me, I know especially, I'm very much like, there's no way I can do that, you know what I mean? There's no way that I could possibly get over this thing or get over this struggle that I have, because it's just too, like, innately ingrained in who I am. But we can overcome a lot, you know what I mean? Humans are, like, very, I don't want to say versatile, but like, we're very adaptable creatures. I mean, like I said earlier, we're very adaptable in that way, and I think the greatest disservice we give ourselves is trying to underplay the resilience we do have within ourselves, for the sake of simply being comfortable, you know what I mean? By giving ourselves a reason of like, well, no, I'm just not strong enough, or I'm not built like that, or I simply can't do it. All of it is just another way of staying comfortable, you know what I mean, and not, at the very least, trying, you know what I mean, to make that change and make that difference, and just stay kind of hyper aware and present. I think that's the biggest thing too, which we can talk about at another time, but I think a lot of growth requires like consistent presence, being aware of yourself and being aware of your thoughts and the intrusive thoughts and what is motivating each and every action. And when you are not kind of constantly aware I think that can often lead, again, to the idleness and also to wanting to give up because we're like, oh, I can't do it. But that's introspection from another time, or for another time, forgive me. But we're at 30 minutes already, and that feels crazy. Thank you for watching these things, if you stuck around to the end. And even if you didn't, that's okay. You can't hear this anyway. But yeah, I am going to try to keep posting more of these. I know it's pretty difficult with just trying to maintain the right, level of sound and background noise, and I really want these to be videos that are not super heavily edited. I really want it to be a more of a free-flowing thing, and I'm going to try to myself also be present in that by trying to make sure I can, of the things that I can control, make it as intentional as I can without, having to nitpick or make it too, I was going to say commercial, but that's a crazy way to go about it, without just making it too, edited, and I just want it to be as authentic as possible, I suppose is what I'm really trying to say. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you are doing okay with whatever you may be going through. Know that you're not alone, that things are going to get better. You have the strength within you to do it and get better. And if you need someone to talk to or to vent, you can message me down in the comments. I think I've got my social media posted somewhere there. If not, I will, like I said, I'll share my substack and things like that. But yeah, you're not alone, and it's going to be okay. We're living in very, very strange times, but I know we won't always be, and it's going to be okay. So I hope you have a good rest of your day, your morning, evening, night, wherever you are. So talk to you later.